Welcome to this edition of the High Strangeness Factor on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I am your host, Steve Ward. On the High Strangeness Factor, we explore all aspects of the paranormal and the unexplained. We look for the parallels and patterns, underlying connections between what we think of as different areas of research, such as UFOs, cryptids, and paranormal phenomena. When we step back and take a wider view, the lines between these different areas begin to blur, and a very different view of reality emerges. I'm very happy to say we're going to have part two with one of my favorite guests here. And Zelia Edgar has had a lifelong interest in the paranormal and has been seriously studying it for over a decade. In that time, she's worked as a field investigator and state director for Wisconsin MUFON, and recently stepped down from that position to focus more time on her own research. Cases that transcend the boundaries of seemingly different types of phenomena are of special interest to her. In addition to researching the paranormal, she writes weird horror and cosmic fiction. Not published yet, but hopefully soon to be published. Zelia, welcome back to the High Strangeness Factor.
Well, hi, thank you.
And I want to let people know that if you're listening to this episode, that there's another episode out there, part one, and you'll definitely want to check that out. We talked about being at the Van Meter Visitor Festival and what fun it was there. Zelia had a presentation there, so did I, and we talked about the great people there. And we hit on all kinds of things, a lot on John Keel, because that's John, as anybody knows that has listened to me at all, knows that I can barely choke out two sentences without talking about John Keel or saying John Keel said this or John Keel wrote that. And Zelia is kind of on the same path, I think. We both hold Mr. Keel in very high regard. And
Yes.
we just have been kind of all over the place, which is kind of what you do when you talk about these kinds of events. So what I kind of wanted to start with, you had a very interesting presentation on orb phenomena or light phenomena, whatever you want to call it, and you also have a shorter version, I think, on YouTube. And again, remind everybody what they type in to find that website or that
So,
link.
if you just go to Google or any search engine and just another tinfoil hat and YouTube, it should come right up.
And I can say that the videos are a great deal of fun.
Thank you.
Zelia, you have a great presence in person when you speak and on YouTube, so people will really enjoy it.
Thank you.
And I think there's kind of a mischievous twinkle in your eye at times, but I could be reading something into that.
Well, maybe, I don't know.
All right. So what when you were asked to do the talk at Van Meter, I guess this is one of the first things you thought about putting together as a presentation.
Yes, it was between talking about the orb phenomena, or my other option was I was going to discuss the Mothman and associated phenomena like that, and potential ties to the Van Meter creature, because those congruencies are there. They're both winged entities. They were both attendant UFO sightings and things like that. But eventually, a lot of people see orbs or light anomaly phenomenon, and so I just decided to go with that one.
And how did you Give us a rough idea how you laid out your presentation, not blow for blow, obviously, but how did you kind of structure it, and what kind of what were some of the specific ideas you wanted to get across?
I always seem to work a little backwards on stuff like this. So I had developed my theory on the orb phenomenon quite a while ago because weird thing here, orbs are actually one thing that I have had a personal experience with. Um, and after seeing them, I became really interested in, okay, what is this?
Now, did you see
And
them in your house or outside or?
no, it was actually a little segue here, I guess. It was really weird. There were four of these perfectly spherical balls of orange light, and I live actually on the corner of the street, and they were floating. And this ties to so much stuff. They were floating right over the intersection, so the crossroads, and right between all these power lines too. And it was these four perfect circles of orange light on these spheres, and they were moving in this kind of like parallelogram formation. And they were probably only, I'd say, 3 stories up in the air. It was a very cloudy night. The clouds were very low, and so it was incredibly close. I could tell like they weren't Chinese lanterns or glow balloons or anything like that. And one by one started blinking out, and then the next one blinked out, and the next one blinked out, and the next one blinked out, and they were just gone. The best part about this is I saw them with my mom and sisters, and we're watching these things, and all of a sudden, the neighbor boy comes tearing down the street, and he runs into his house. And so we're like, okay, he must have seen him too. So of course we go over and we ask him, like, hey, you saw those things, right? And he said, he was like all shaken up. He was like, no, you don't understand. This is the second time they came over.
Ah,
And so we were like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, I was at Washington School, which is just like a couple blocks away from my house. And he's like, I was there and they came over once and then they went away. And I was like, okay, that's weird. But then they came over a second time. And that's when I decided to come home. So, yeah, it was one of the most, like I said, in part one, I have had several paranormal experiences or unexplained experiences through my life. But this was definitely one of the most monumental just because of how close the objects were. And also other witnesses, and the reaction of the kid too was just it's classic.
well, that's always comforting to know that you didn't see it alone, and it was an
Exactly. Yeah.
objective phenomena. Uh,
Yeah.
Before you get a little bit more into your talk, did you have any sense about them being just sort of a manifestation of energy without any purpose? Is there any chance they might have been conscious or life forms or anything like that from the way
See,
you reacted to them?
that's the interesting thing is and it's funny too because I do take, researching this stuff very seriously. It's almost like when I have a personal encounter, I'm very guarded about it. Like the whole time I'm kind of trying to dissect it as it goes along. And it's hard to say because they were not behaving in just a random manner. They were in a perfectly fixed, even sort of formation. And even when they blinked out, it would start very slow and even, and then just faster and faster and faster, and they were just gone. So I definitely had the sense that they were under some sort of control. As to what that is, that's the question about all of this, I guess.
As if, and again, you don't really know, you're just speculating, but as if they were controlled by something else, another intelligence, or that I mean, some people, there's quite a system of thought where people believe that some of these things, these lights in the sky and so forth, are actually living creatures, intelligent. So
Yeah.
did you think they were controlled by something else, or was it possible they were actually living life forms of some kind? Or is that
That's
just too too out there to know?
it's one of those things too where it's hard to tell because in a way they didn't seem organic, but like in saying that they also didn't seem to be possessed by anything. Like there was no larger structure surrounding them.
Right.
Like some accounts it appears almost like there'll be a shape behind them or something. I saw like absolutely no connection, but they all moved in unison. So
Interesting.
yeah, it was weird, and that's definitely what kind of kicked me into gear for starting to pay attention to these sightings. Because, before that, I had really just thought of orbs as like, oh, people see them in haunted houses, and then you get the dust photos that are all over the internet, and, I just didn't really think very much of them. But after this, it did take a special interest to me just because, I'd witnessed it and I wanted to understand what it was.
Do you remember the purple lights that John Keel talked about in the Chief Cornstalk area in the
Yes.
Mothman
Okay.
Prophecies? And he talks about them, and he talks about how that one particular valley was all lit up and so forth. And he asked the farmer about it, and he said,
Yeah.
"Oh yeah, that's been going on for years. I don't go in there because one of my dogs disappeared in there." Well, there
Yep.
was in one of his talks, and I'll have to find a link to this. You can find somewhere on eBay or whatever, like a series of maybe 10 lectures of John Keel over the
Oh,
years. Of course, they're shot very poorly, but it doesn't matter. And he
yeah.
talked about that incident in more detail. And he
Really?
said that these things actually came down close to him, like they were checking him out, and
Oh my
surrounded
gosh.
him, flipped around him a few times before doesn't, it either was edited out of the Mothman
Yeah.
prophecies or he decided not to report that. And that's made me think. I wonder. And of course, there's the work of Trevor James Constable that talked about photographing sky amoebas with
Yeah.
infrared photography.
Mhm.
And listened, rather interviewed a guy, Nick Hayes, I believe, who has gone into the same path as Constable did, and has gotten many strange photographs, some of which may be digital artifacts because hasn't seen anything like you did with his
Yeah.
naked eye. But it's a fascinating area. But go ahead.
No, yeah, I have also heard of like the amoeba type objects, and those are really interesting to me too. Because yeah, those seem definitely biological or organic, whereas these were. It was weird because they were perfectly spherical and just moving in a fixed perfect path. It was so bizarre. But yeah, no, so that's what kicked me into like kind of looking into all this stuff, and it's funny, and that's kind of how I structured my presentation. The more you look into orbs, the more it's like they are delineated like most things are in the paranormal too. Okay, you got your ghost orbs, you got your UFO orbs. No one really likes to pay attention to when cryptids like Bigfoot are seen with orbs. Um, so that's kind of what got me thinking about, okay, well, then why are people seeing orbs with these different, seemingly unrelated types of phenomena? Because, again, of course, I'm a fan of Keel, so I know, I really like to think about these things in kind of a unified field theory sort of way. So that was my first line of reasoning. And then that kind of culminated to my personal take on it is they may be some sort of manifestation of electromagnetic energy. Um, and with regards to the different phenomena, then each different type of phenomena would then possess some sort of electromagnetic charge. So that was kind of the idea, roughly, that I was going with in my presentation.
And it's interesting because you and I gave a similar example in a different context, and it was tell us about the uh, the case where it appeared that a Bigfoot stalled an automobile.
Yeah, I love that case.
Yeah, so do I.
It was Marlington, West Virginia, I think it was,
Yes,
and I don't remember the year exactly, but some
60, I think, but
yeah,
I could be wrong.
yeah, it was. I know it was at some point around then, yeah. And a guy was driving. He was following a bus full of people, and all of a sudden his car shorts out. And so he pulls over and like looks to the side of the road and sees a Bigfoot-like creature, which had been observed in the area around that time. And this is directly too from Strange Creatures from Time and Space. And so he like sits in the car. He doesn't remember how long. Suddenly, his buddies finally realize he's not following them, so they come back around. The Bigfoot-like creature vanishes, and his car starts back up. So then he's continuing on his merry way. His car shorts out again. He looks to the side of the road and sees the Bigfoot-like creature again. And it's implied, at least in the book, that his car was completely fried after that.
Yes.
So that case, it really stands out because you do get that sometimes. I know there's even around the time of the Flatwoods Monster, some people claimed that a lizard-like humanoid creature did the same thing to their vehicle.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I have to find the source on that. There's also
Yeah.
a one in 72 on California where it wasn't a stall, but they couldn't get the car started when they saw this sort of a Bigfoot-like creature. Of course,
Yeah.
you could imagine it's like a bad script from a
Yeah.
sci-fi channel when your
Yeah.
car always stalls when you're being pursued by something.
Oh
And
yeah. Of
uh,
course.
and Brandy, the lady that was at Van Meter and my
Mhm.
substitute co-host at one time, discovered one in one of the. Are you familiar with Dogman Encounters Radio? Vic Cundiff. Has had many episodes out. People from recent times and people that have seen a dog man way back and have wouldn't tell anybody about it because it's too crazy,
Yeah.
have come forward. And one of them, a lady, I forget what name they used, but she had the same kind of thing. She had an encounter with one of these upright canids and she couldn't get her car started.
Yeah.
So, and then if you go with Ron Moorhead, of course,
Mhm.
was the guy that captured the Sierra Sounds and believed for a long time that Bigfoot was a flesh and blood creature. Talked
Yeah.
about how their batteries would drain around them
Yep.
and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, I found it interesting too because and I know this is like always up for debate. The Patterson Gimlin footage is to this day the best footage we have, in my opinion, of
Yes,
a
I agree.
Sasquatch, and it was captured on film. And so I always wonder now too if there is something with the charge of digital cameras that just isn't congruent with that.
Yeah, I wonder. Yeah, you wonder how. I mean, if when you examine that, people have examined the
Hmm.
the muscle flow and
Yep.
the way, the step, and so forth, and it really is incontrovertible that it is
Yeah.
it's a real something.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
but
Well, I loved it too.
how
Oh,
did they
sorry.
get that?
Yeah, it's amazing, and I love it too because I have a huge interest in costuming, and I know they've had people in like professional Hollywood costumers come and look at the footage, and they're like, you couldn't do this, even now. And so, how did they do it then? And it's obvious then that it's not something that they manufactured; it was something that was there. So,
I saw Bill Moon give a presentation where he had photographed various models, real people
yeah.
in the same positions, and you see the muscle tone and so forth, and you compare it to Patty, as they call her, and
Hmm.
it's the same thing. So that's and for a long time, I mean, when I got heavily into John Keel,
Yeah.
I was preaching from the Church of Keel, man, and nobody
Yeah.
wanted to hear me. I went to the
Oh yeah.
1976 MUFON Symposium, and these guys were all ET guys, and
Oh yeah.
they couldn't wait. It was like spending an evening with an insurance salesman. They just didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
So, but uh, but I was
Oh.
so heavy into Keel that I thought, well, maybe the Gimlin thing is something else or isn't real.
Yeah. No, and see, that's again the interesting paradox of like, yeah, once you embrace the super spectrum idea and you kind of take in the theory that this stuff is, you know, not entirely corporeal or whatever, you still have cases like the Patterson Gimlin footage or any of the casts that have the indisputable dermal ridges. These things also still leave trace evidence. It's just, it's interesting. It's very interesting.
Right. Um, and I want to stress the fact that usually that there was a movement out. They were saying just say no to orbs, and you made the point last episode, I think, where you have to be careful because
Yeah.
obviously a lot of these things are just digital artifacts or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
But if you throw them all out, there's some very compelling stuff there.
Well, yeah, and that's what's so frustrating because honestly, in preparing for my presentation too, when I was doing all the research and stuff, if you look up orbs at all, in relation to anything paranormal, 99% of the images you get are dust or, rain, moisture, bugs, reflections. And, most of the articles are, talking about, yeah, you can't use this, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, of course, yes, you can't. And it's just a shame that it's, become such a cliche, really, and that there's so much of that out there because specifically interesting to me are the people who see these things with the naked eye. Just because with photographs, again, it's so difficult to really, say for sure this is an orb when it's in a photograph just because of all of the misidentification that can go on. But the people who experience them, you know, face to face pretty much, that is, it's all still there. It's just that it's kind of covered up by all the bad evidence.
Right, and it's just too bad. it's something that happens where people want to reject everything, just throw
Yep.
everything out. And sometimes I think people are just trying to sound credible. It's like,
Yeah.
look at me. I don't accept everything. I'm very critical and sift through this. But, I've
Yeah.
also heard, it seems to me that on Art Bell one time, Coast to Coast AM years ago, a police officer called in and claimed, and, I don't quote me on this, but
Yeah.
claimed he saw a ball. I've heard of people seeing like a ball of light and something being inside, like a creature or something that
I have. Yeah.
just one particular case it supposedly stepped out of this thing.
I have heard of reports like that too. And also too, that's common in ghost people. I mean, of course, you still have the photographs, but people have claimed seeing, with the naked eye orbs that appear to have faces in them. Um, in regards to the UFO phenomenon, people take them to be like, some sort of additional craft to some other craft because they have seen entities inside and things like that. And yeah, those I haven't researched extensively, but they're kind of next on my list because, again, I'm just intrigued by the whole thing.
There's that one incident on the infamous Skinwalker Ranch or the
Oh yeah,
Bradshaw Ranch or the Sherman Ranch or whatever, where it might be a little different though because the one scientist that was there were looking through, the incident I'm talking about with the infrared goggles. He saw something that looked like it was it looked like just a light if you could see it with the naked eye. But when he looked at it with the night vision, it was as if
yeah,
something was climbing through a tunnel and
yep,
stepping out.
yeah. I've heard so like Skinwalker Ranch is kind of like the mecca of all these crazy anomalies, and orbs too are really commonly reported there. And there that might be the one, or there might be another one too, where they claimed that it was almost like a portal, and they could see like a thing kind of moving out of that. And I believe it was sort of like a canid, an upright canid type creature
Right.
that was
Um,
observed.
Yeah, well, yeah, I take it you've read The Hunt for the Skinwalker or maybe some of the other stuff about the Skinwalker Ranch?
I've kept up with a lot of the articles. I haven't gotten the book yet, but
Okay.
it's on my list of like 1,000 books.
That's another one I have
Yeah,
ever since I discovered audible.com. And by the
yeah,
way, that last time I said, if you're interested in John Keel, pursuing John Keel, you can get a lot of his stuff now on Audible, and it's great because, a lot of people don't have time to read all the time. But
yeah,
Uh, okay, I had a point with this. I was going and it was going to be brilliant, but I just lost it. But there's a lot of other instances where, well, the Skinwalker Ranch, I guess, is what I
yeah,
was talking about. Is where I was listening to that again on Audible, and it is fascinating, and
yeah,
it's that you had the National Institute for Discovery Science there.
yep.
There's nothing in it for these guys to make it up. Bigelow's a billionaire. He's not going to make up a
Yeah,
bunch of wild stories to sell a book that's not going to give him more than a few bucks.
yeah. No, and I get the same vibe from the website too. It's like, nothing that's really making any money or any like, you know, fame or anything. It's just kind of like they're reporting the stuff.
It's interesting. I met Erica Lukes at the UFO Contact event last year, and she has had access to the Skinwalker Ranch, but
Oh my,
she gets a positive vibe from it.
really?
Yes, and
Huh.
I don't know enough. I was on her show once a while ago, but I'd like to hear more about it. And she's also seen some strange mists there, which makes me think of Linda Godfrey,
Yep.
because
Yeah.
have you heard her give her presentation about finding strange mists in particular hotspots?
Yes. Yeah. I
And
know, and that was another thing that with my presentation I was going to almost bring up because I feel like maybe that's possibly connected to the orb thing, but then it just got to be like, you'd start pulling one thing in and then a million things come along with it.
I know, and that's a couple times that's what I did during my talk, and I will be doing it coming up in Toledo, is you start with one thing, and it
Yeah.
connects to this, and then it goes here. It's like you're going serpentine, like the
Yeah.
old movie of the In-Laws, and you're not trying to be cute or clever. It's just that if you follow the connections, you get
Yeah.
like with the mist. Who was it? Elias Owen, I think, wrote a book on Welsh folklore in the 1800s, and he talked about how wayfarers on the road were terrified at night if they encountered a
Yeah.
mist because the fairies sometimes, and we're not talking about Tinkerbell, fairies
Yeah.
could be a little nasty, the in quotes real ones, would lift the wayfarer up in the air for a little mischief, and then deposited him somewhere and leave him to find his way home.
Yep. And then this ties all the way back to the Van Meter visitor too, with the strange mist that it emitted
Yes,
and the loss of memory. Yeah.
that's uh, that's fascinating. We're getting into some total heaviosity here.
Yeah.
um, let's see. Is there anything else about the orb presentation, any particular thing you'd like to bring up, or that struck you as being very important?
Um.
And
Boy, I don't. It
we can
was.
always come back to it if you want.
Yeah. I was just excited to be presenting. So the whole thing, like, I started, and then you helped me with my slides. Thank you very much for that. And then from then on, it was kind of just a blank until I hit the end and the questions.
How many? Can I ask how many times you practiced your thing out loud?
Oh, geez.
You don't
Probably.
have to say, but I did. What I usually do is I'll be at home and I'll be
Yeah.
kind of mumbling to myself, looking at
Yeah.
the computer and the slides. So I'm not. But sometimes, if nobody's home, then I'll get very loud and boisterous and everything. But I was a friend. I was able to uh, do the presentation a couple times in front of a friend, and that really
Okay.
helped. So,
Yeah.
but
No, for me, it was probably actually running through it. It was at least a dozen times in that last, like, probably week and a half, 2 week period. But yeah, no, the best time I was rehearsing once, like, just alone to myself, but I was going all out. So I was, going through the whole thing. And I got to the point where I was talking about the dust orbs and I said dusts. And my little sister heard me from the other room and started laughing. I'm like, come on, man. Oh, yeah. So as long
well,
as I didn't say dusts, it went pretty well.
yeah, it went very well, and it just goes to show. I mean, I suppose there are people out there that can just run through this a couple times and just sound wonderful.
Yeah.
But the reality for me is I really have to practice and practice and
Yeah.
practice. You know.
Oh yeah, well for me too, it's like I said before, I'm just so used to making videos where I can, like, if I don't like something, it's just cut and I can do another
Right.
take. I can run through it as many times as I need to, and that it was just like it was knowing that it was just one shot that really, you know, oh man, yeah, a
But
lot of extra prep.
but you're right. The orb phenomena is a continuing thing. There's
Yeah.
a fascinating book called Valley of the Skookum by Sally Shepard Wolford, and her daughter is Autumn Williams, another famous Bigfoot researcher.
Oh,
Well, she grew up between the ages of about 4 and 7 in Ording, Washington, and so her mom, years later, wrote a story about all the weird things that happened there because Autumn wouldn't have remembered much of it. But she
yeah.
does remember seeing these big, hairy Bigfoots. And she, but her mom chronicled orange orbs chasing the cars there, classic
Wow.
flying saucer phenomenon. Uh, let's talk a little bit about, I think you did a presentation on, or maybe a YouTube thing on Bigfoot because
Yeah.
in the Ording, Washington thing, they would see some of them were glowing at night,
Yep.
some would actually vanished before their eyes, and they had all kinds of other stuff. Even Men in Black showed up later on. But what is your view on Bigfoot? I mean, I know you talked about we just talked about the situation where the one seemed to stall the car,
Yeah.
but what do you have any other thoughts about Bigfoot in general?
Well, it's one of those things too where, like I said, cryptozoology was like that was my big thing when I first got into all this stuff, and Um, for the longest time, I was convinced that Bigfoot was simply, an undiscovered primate. Um, and to this day, I still haven't entirely made up my mind, just because I feel like there's enough room for that to potentially be an option. But then you have so many cases then that would be outliers, such as, yeah, the case in Marlington, West Virginia, where he stalled the car, or any of the number of cases where they're accompanied by orbs or, even UFOs and stuff like that. And so currently, that's one that I'm still very much on the fence about. I don't know, too, if, potentially using the idea of, like, mimicry as part of this, the ultra terrestrial idea, if maybe there is a corporeal, animal that we consider the Bigfoot, and then there are also cases that are almost mimicries of that. Um, that's kind of the next theory I'm kind of going to look into.
That's kind of where I have gone. because you look at, I mean, some of the reports obviously are very, as we said before, very solid flesh and blood, leaving footprints, and normal footprints, not the three-toed ones that you see
Yeah.
occasionally. Um, and then you have the Bigfoots that Stan Gordon,
Yeah.
with the connection with UFOs in Pennsylvania,
Yeah.
southwestern Pennsylvania, which one lady heard some commotion on her porch, thought it was dogs getting into her garbage again. This is in the midst of all these
Yeah.
sightings and so forth, and she sees this thing that she describes as a gorilla because she doesn't have the context of Bigfoot, and
Yeah.
blasts it point blank with a shotgun and disappears in a hail of sparks.
Yes. Yep. I've heard of that case, and there's so many like that too, where it's like, if it's a corporeal thing, it should be injured. But no, it's one of those things where I have thought about this because it does puzzle me, quite a bit. But then I'm like, think of all the accounts of like so-called phantom animals. You have phantom chickens, phantom cats and dogs,
Yes.
phantom pigs. That's another one. So is it that far-fetched then that potentially these so-called outlier sightings might just be, a phantom version of an actual corporeal creature known as Bigfoot?
I
Um,
don't think I want to encounter a horde of phantom
yeah,
chickens, but go ahead.
yeah, no kidding. But yeah, no, it's all yeah. There's just again with all of this, there's so much to take into consideration.
Well, that does seem like, and we have to be careful when people will use the term interdimensional uh,
Yes,
very quickly. And
yeah,
do we mean, is it a flesh and blood solid being that can somehow move into another dimension and become invisible for a while, and then
yeah,
come back, but it's not ethereal, it's not a phantom, or is it something more like a thought form, or I'd like to talk about the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who of course is the
mm,
Sherlock Holmes guy,
yeah,
firmly believed in the elementals and the fairies,
yep,
but said that perhaps he believed that the person viewing them actually determined what they look
yeah,
like, and even speculated that they might be thought forms. That sounds so much like John Keel,
yeah. I know.
years before.
Yeah, I have heard of that theory too, and yeah, like the cultural context of the viewer could determine whatever's being viewed. And again, all this stuff too, it almost touches on the nature of like how do we perceive reality, which you know, yeah, it's just lots of questions.
And then if some of this is sort of via Carl Jung, out of the collective unconscious,
Yeah,
he believed that the UFOs may be projections and so forth. But
yeah,
then why do we only seem to project certain things? Why
exactly.
certain cryptids, even though we look into some of the weird cryptids in a second, but
Yeah,
why UFOs, why cryptids, why certain things, every once in a while something really bizarre, why not Professor Dumbledore or Harry
yeah,
Potter on a broom, because that's so embedded in human consciousness?
yeah. And that's the thing is like, if these things are solely based on our response, you'd think that they would kind of be quicker on the uptake, and they'd start mimicking, pop culture. Yeah, like you're saying.
But it's very specific. And I think off the air we talked a little bit about how you get your certain categories of
Yeah.
cryptids, and what the ones we're kind of almost comfortable with. You got your
Yes.
Mothman and some variations with winged creatures. You've got the various Bigfoot type creatures. Yeah, throw in a couple chupacabras now and then,
Yeah.
and but then every once in a while you get these just aberrations.
Yeah.
From kind of humanoid creatures to almost like bug-eyed monsters. And why don't you talk a little bit about? I know you've done some studying of things like the Enfield monster, the Dover demon, and so forth. What are some of the talk about some of the cryptids that you find most fascinating that don't really fit a pattern very well?
Yeah, those are actually two of the highlights, I would say. And in combination, the Flatwoods Monster is another one that I consider to be an outlier. Um, and they're all interesting in their own way, strictly because they don't really have a neat niche that they can fall into, even though, I mean, the Flatwoods Monster, I think a lot of people just associate with extraterrestrials because of, the sighting of the thing in the sky, even though we can't even call that a craft particularly because it was just a luminous, pear-shaped object. Um, but no, the Enfield Horror, that's one that was probably like the first major outlier case that really started getting me thinking in like a different way of looking at this stuff. just because it doesn't fit any sort of model. I mean, supposedly it was this gray furred thing that had three legs, and two like little taloned hands, and massive pink flashlight eyes. And it was harassing this house full of kids. Their parents had gone away for the evening, and it was like trying to get in the house through the door first and then an air conditioner unit. And this thing was actually covered pretty well by the media and hunted for several days around that area. And many people saw it. It was accompanied too by anomalous like noises, screaming noises, I believe, if I remember correctly. And yeah, it just doesn't really fit any model. And even the Dover Demon too, even though that's considered kind of a classic, really also is an outlier. I mean, you have this thing with incredibly spindly body, massive eyes. First thing I think of course, is like a gray alien. However, this one had absolutely no mouth or nose, and there were no attendant UFO sightings, no cases of abduction or missing time in the area, and it didn't behave in any manner that we, would expect of, a UFO occupant to behave. And so I, I really got interested in these just because of how strange they really were. And I started to kind of wonder, it was mainly with the Dover Demon that I kind of thought about this because of one of the comments that one of the witnesses said. They said that its flesh was the color of like a comic book person, kind of an exaggerated sort of peach tone. And I started like, in looking at it that way, almost as it was supposed to be a representation of something, I started to wonder if maybe some of these outliers are almost like flopped projections of whatever, sort of consciousness may be a part of the superspectrum idea, kind of garbled into our current frame of reference.
So that every once in a while something just bizarre spits out,
Yeah,
something that's not uniform with the rest of the stuff. Uh,
yeah.
in The Monster Files by Nick Redfern, he talks about a guy named Jasper Maskelyne, I think his name is. He was a highly skilled magician. He was employed by the British Army during World War II. He did like psyops things where he tried to create visions of the Virgin Mary to fool the populace. And they even
Oh,
created something to scare some of the people in the mountains of Italy that looks a little
yep.
bit like do you know about that, about the Flatwoods
Flatwoods
Monster?
Monster.
Right.
Yep, I had read about that. Yeah.
It was
Oh,
trying to think. It was something that shot blue sparks out, and it was about 12 feet tall. And
yeah.
I saw an illustration of it, and I thought, I wonder, if but if you can imagine the Flatwoods Monster, you think about all the things that happened there. If that was
Yeah.
some kind of a black ops back in '52,
Yeah.
I don't know. That doesn't. Nothing
Well,
seems to fit.
and again, now we have the concept of maybe, potentially, like that is something that occurred and could explain that singular sighting, but maybe not. Like the crop circle issue of how people will be faking them, and then a simultaneous one will appear with, you know, totally anomalous nearby. Because I had read about that too when I was researching the Flatwoods Monster, and I thought, oh, okay, it's been explained. But then, yeah, you go into everything else that happened, and again, it starts to make less and less sense in the grand scheme of everything that occurred.
That was something that when I did the interview with Chad Lewis, I can't remember exactly how he put it, but it was something about you research these things and you sometimes you'll be able to explain some things, but then there's something in left field that
Yeah,
doesn't fit anything, but
yeah,
it's sort of like it's like the trickster
yeah,
idea where there's something playing with it. It's like no, you really haven't figured this out because look at this.
yeah. I know it's like the one fly in the ointment, the one thing that you just can't weave in. Um, yeah, because no, I saw that. I was like, oh, okay, because the Flatwoods Monster actually bothered me. And it comes down to something that actually should make sense. It was the fact that it appeared to be so robotic. Um, and that's one of the major incongruencies that I love that John Keel points out is that whenever we have these UFO occupants, they're never wearing protective gear, like most of the time.
Right.
Most of the time, they're just, wearing like regular clothes or like, their spacesuits or anything like that, but there's no protective like hazmat suit as you would expect an extraterrestrial would need on our planet, just as we need when we go into space. And so that was a thing that really got me about the Flatwoods monsters. Here you finally have something that makes sense. You finally have an inorganic looking object, a robot, and rover of some sort. But then you have everything else. So,
So what do you think about the Kelly Hopkinsville goblins?
oh my gosh, I love that case too because it is considered such a classic in ufology. But again, once you really start looking into it, it just there's so much that doesn't add up. The really interesting thing to me, and I wish I could remember which book this was in. It was in one of John Keel's books, but he described a woman whose house was kind of under attack by a bunch of Sasquatches, and they apparently just kind of kept moving in on the house in these waves. And no matter what she did, they would just keep coming at the house. And the weird thing is, when I was kind of going over the Kelly Hopkinsville encounter, it sounds like that's exactly how these entities were moving on the farmhouse, just in waves. There was no real conscious plan of attack. There's not even a clear sense of motive, just that they were trying to get at the farmhouse. And again, you just have to wonder if there is some sort of thing behind the mask. I guess you could say that it's behaving in a similar way, whether it's the Hopkinsville hobgoblins or a troop of Bigfoot. So
And I think they're connected with the Hellier investigation, aren't they? The Greg and Dana Newkirk did that six-part series that they're going to be continuing, where there's this town in West Virginia where all this strange stuff is happening. I think they were led into it by the somebody saying that they were seeing these little goblin-like creatures that
yep,
were, yeah, somewhat
I did hear
reminiscent of
about
the Kelly
it.
Hopkinsville, right?
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah.
So, uh, but yes, it's just I get caught in what I call a logic loop. For a
Yep.
while there, I'm very Keel-esque, and I think,
Yep.
okay, this is not ET, this is paranormal, this has got this, and then something pulls you around, and you think, well, wait a minute, this aspect is very physical, this is very
Yep.
very kind of real, and then you follow that for a while, and then you're caught in that whirlpool where you get sucked in on the other
Yeah.
side again. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, that makes I have yeah, that's kind of like my constant frame of research. It'll be, you know, you look at because you look at so many things and they fit a certain way, but then there'll be the one thing that leads you back to the other way, and then you'll be in that, and then there's the one thing that leads you back to something else, and it's kind of never ending.
What if, so let's suppose this mechanism exists in human consciousness that Keel has talked about, like where it's reflective. We see,
Yeah.
in the old days, we see the lights and we interpret them as dragon tracks or fairy lights or whatever. And then we see the ghost rockets and the ghost flyers, and then the Foo Fighters, and then modern day UFO craft, and on and on. Uh, what if there is an aspect of human consciousness where it's reflective, it's creative, it's like monsters from the id, so to speak, from like the
Yeah.
film Forbidden Planet. But there's also some kind of an other intelligence, the others amongst us, as Albert Rosales would write for his books, and that intelligence is perfectly aware of this aspect of our consciousness, and then perhaps what if they could exploit it somehow through
Yeah.
force of their will or technology and use it to mask their activities? I know that's way out there,
Yeah.
but that would begin to explain how both of these areas could exist simultaneously.
Yeah. No, there does seem to be I guess you could say almost a give and take with human consciousness and then whatever this is. The big thing that just constantly occurs to me is how, if these things are capable of so much, why do they need the game? And I think that too in regards to the alien abduction phenomenon. Like, if you are dealing with such an advanced society, why are they taking people and removing parts of their memory and for what purpose? It's always the question of motive and why is this happening? And we can't even really begin to answer that until we have the what exactly is it.
Right. And let me just remind everybody that you are listening to the High Strangeness Factor, copyrighted on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. And I'm going to do another little quick segue here. I noticed you have some other YouTube videos up that aren't directly connected to some of this stuff, sort of like readings.
Oh yeah, yep, that's in line with my writing side
Oh,
of
okay.
stuff.
So
And I do have,
is
yeah,
that
I have,
is that stuff that you've all created?
yes.
And they can find that by typing your name, right?
Yeah, as far as I know, I haven't done much with that for a long while, but I have a definite interest in film, so I was trying some stuff out. But yeah,
And,
I think
and,
that
and
is just yeah.
yeah, and by the way, spell your name for everybody so
Oh,
they'll know.
sure thing. It's Zelia Edgar.
So, and they can find you if they want. We're not done yet, but I just
Yeah.
didn't want to forget. That's how they can find you on Facebook. And if they want to find your other cool videos about all kinds of paranormal stuff, all they have to do is type in all one word, just another tinfoilhat.com.
Yep.
Yes, okay. And those are fun. I haven't been through all those yet, but those are definitely worth checking out.
Well,
What about the Enfield monster?
Um, the Enfield monster. Yeah, that's a definite outlier because of, you know, the three legs. That's what definitely threw me off because
Yeah.
you think most creatures on Earth, we have, our bilateral sort of, very symmetrical composition. And then you have that which has three legs, yet two eyes and two arms. And again, I just had to wonder if it was some sort of almost flopped projection. And I know that is very assumptive then that there's something projecting, but I don't know how else to explain it.
And it's almost like the Dover Demon, a real outlier, just kind of an
Yeah,
aberration.
yeah. And I don't believe there were any attendant UFO sightings with the Enfield monster either, which I start when, first off, too, when I have like, a case that has a creature that seems so abnormal, the first thing I look for is, the high strangeness, more fringe stuff like for the UFO sightings, poltergeist activity. And it just gets weirder when there isn't, you know.
Yes, nothing nothing fits into neat categories, even into strange paranormal categories.
Yeah.
And what about that case in southwestern Wisconsin? Uh, the family that it was
Oh,
experiencing
yeah.
just yeah
The Nodolf House.
yes.
That is actually a story that I grew up hearing. It's still very much alive and well. My mom's side of the family is from Platteville, Wisconsin, so that's my grandma still lives there actually, and it's still kind of passed along, kind of like a folk tale, but it is purported to be true. In the late 1800s, there was a family that lived in this stone house on the side of the Platte Mound, which today actually has the Big M, which is literally just a massive M made of whitewashed stone on the side of the mound. Um, and so they lived on the mound, and one night there was a massive storm, and apparently the mother woke to hear her two children crying, and so she went to check on them, and they weren't in the house. So apparently, then they heard them from outside. Now, the doors and windows were all still bolted and shut, and the kids couldn't even reach the locks at that time. They were, I believe, 2 years old and 4 years old. And so the parents freak out. They run outside. It's downpouring. They grab the kids, bring them back in, and they're, going to go and get dry clothes for them because they've been out in the storm for who knows how long. And the kids are totally dry. It's like they haven't even been outside in this rainstorm, this torrential downpour. While the parents, of course, got completely soaked just running out to get them. And I do have to revise something here because I just heard from Todd Roll, who's a folklorist and also now the head librarian at the University of Platteville.
And also he spoke last year at the Band Meter Visitor Festival.
Yes, he did, yeah. Um, Apparently, it's like kind of part of the legend now that the kids stuttered then for the rest of their lives. That actually is not true, but they couldn't say what happened to them, and for the rest of that night were apparently speechless. Um, so again, there's so much going on and also so little going on with that. You just have this anomaly of these two kids pretty much being transported outside through locked doors and windows in the middle of a downpour and then not being influenced by the rain, which to me reminds me of many of the sightings of the assorted men in black around the time of the Point Pleasant incidents, who would walk up, muddy hills in the
Oh,
middle of
that's
nowhere
right. Yeah.
with nothing on them, and it just you have to wonder about that. So, and apparently too, the town of Anneton, which is nearby that area, is said to vanish from time to time. And I
Oh,
guess sometimes people get caught in the in between. But
oh man, that's
yeah,
well, that all that is kind of shades a little bit of missing 411.
yes,
The
yeah,
work of and those that don't, if those that don't know what I'm talking about, David Paulides, a retired police and or police detective, I guess,
yeah,
uh, has several books where he's chronicled really bizarre disappearances. These are
yep,
not easily explained,
no,
and it made me when you talked about how the kids were suddenly gone and transplanted, and there are cases where children have been missing for days
yep,
and they're fine. It's like
yeah,
they've been taken care of, but
yes,
there's nobody there.
yeah.
Um, and then that said that that area where you people where what was it, a mound you said that appears and disappears?
Yes, it is. It's not a man-made mound, which I know are very common around this area of Wisconsin, the Great Lakes. But it is just a natural mound.
Well, that reminds me. There's another a case. Dermot McManus talked about. He wrote a book on the fairy world in Ireland and so forth. But he
Yeah.
talks about a case where a young lady was a caretaker for his aunt. Well, she takes off on her day off and she wanders into an area that's a known, supposed to be a fairy hill or whatever. And
Yeah.
she walks up and then she goes to walk down and she finds she's walking up again. And every time she
Ah,
turns around, she's
yep.
trapped and she walks up. I don't know if you've heard about this one.
I've
And
heard about cases like that. Yeah.
and she and then she comes across like an invisible wall where she can't get out, and so
Hmm.
she's gone for hours. They go out with the torches and try to find her, and she can see them, and she's yelling at them. This is like a Twilight Zone episode,
Yeah.
and they can't hear her. Eventually this barrier or whatever goes away, and she makes her way back home at 3 in the morning. But some of that
Oh.
sounds so much like what you're talking about and missing 411.
Oh yeah, I know. And yeah, the Nodolf case, it is. It's again, like I said, it's still passed along, in that area, but outside of southwestern Wisconsin, I don't know if it's very well known. But yeah, it's definitely interesting.
I've heard a couple of cases. A lady that was on my show, Marnie Kirby, and another guy I met went out at the Exeter, uh, New Hampshire
Mm.
festival. Talked about seeing sort of humanoid people, but very angular and moving. They would move very quickly. Just very
Yeah.
another crazy aberration in the phantom menagerie, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
Uh, have you done much looking into Loch Ness?
Not recently. It like I said, it was like one of my favorite things back when I was younger, but not so much since then, unfortunately.
I invite you to check out. Well, actually, Nick Redfern picked up the mantle on the stranger aspects of
Yeah.
Loch Ness in one of his more recent books in the last couple of years. But F.W. Holliday found that he would find the same type of creatures in different lakes and lochs in Scotland and Ireland, but the lakes were so small that
Yeah.
well, you have reliable people seeing these things, but there wasn't a big enough fish population to feed even
Yeah.
one of these creatures, much less a colony.
I have heard of that, and two, when you take like the sonar out, and I know stuff can like that's not completely reliable, but it comes down to the fact that to try and imagine, because if you imagine one creature that's an actual flesh and blood creature, you have to imagine a population
Yes.
in order for them to keep on providing sightings for these people. And to try and imagine inserting a population of these massive prehistoric beasts into any number of these lakes, it doesn't make sense. The more you try and fit it.
Well, the also you look at the tradition that goes back hundreds of years, the shape-shifting water kelpie,
Ah,
the
yeah.
water horse, which was thought of as some kind of a evil elemental that would lure men and women to their doom and drown them and so forth. But and know that Nick Redfern reported that people were also seeing something like a giant frog-like creature in the loch, and also a something like a crocodile with tusks. Now,
Huh.
how can there be that many
Yeah.
unknowns in the loch and not being seen?
Well, that sounds a lot like too Devil's Lake here in Wisconsin. Traditionally, you try and research what's supposed to be in the lake, and it's either something that sounds like a massive octopus. Sometimes you'll get like plesiosaur, Nessie type reports, and then yeah, a massive frog is like this random outlier. And yeah, it's like okay, so you got a monster in a lake, can at least decide on what monster it is.
Yes, and even in the in Strange Creatures from Time and Space with Keel covering, and he covered everything. He covered.
Oh
Oh,
yeah.
oh, one thing he mentioned. I don't know what if you thought about this. I read somewhere where he suggested that when the entity or the creature is glowing, it's definitely either it's a projection or a hallucinatory experience.
Yeah.
That's one way to determine whether or not it's actually a flesh and blood creature.
See, that's specifically helpful too with Bigfoot encounters because you have some where it's like, it does appear to be just a creature, but then there's so many accounts where it's like, okay, its eyes are glowing red, or it's like projecting beams from its eyes, and then you're like, okay, that's, you can't chalk that up to eye shine, especially, during the day or if there's no source of light or anything. It just, yeah.
Well, there's some areas where it's just we're talking about the mental dimension versus the physicality of it. There was a case in Wales in '78 or so, the Sutherland family. The kids were actually seeing landings and interacting with some of these again these weird angular humanoid aliens. But one night, Gaynor Sutherland is her mother goes upstairs and sees that she's in kind of a trance and her arms
Hmm.
are rigid against her. And she's having an experience with these aliens, not like a dream, but like it's real. But it's she's not hasn't gone anywhere. And the same
Yeah.
thing happened to Orfeo Angelucci, one of the contactees in the 50s, and all the way back to Anne Jeffreys in the 1600s. People were having these incredibly detailed experiences, not dreamlike, that they could
Yeah.
recount, but they didn't go anywhere. They were in a trance.
Well, there was two that one case that was documented, I believe in, oh, gosh, I can't remember which one it was, but one of Keel's books about the father and son who were fishing and underwent a massive abduction experience. They were questioned by the Air Force, I believe, and then there was some like security camera nearby or something. Somehow there was footage captured of them just standing there for like the entire 2 hours that they claimed their experience took, that entire length of time,
Wow.
staring at nothing. Um, I wish I could remember what book I read that in.
Right, but
But
that's an important point though, because it does seem like in some of these cases where people. So how do we differentiate between
yeah,
the experiences where people and if Keel's right about some of the Men in Black experiences being
yes,
hallucinatory, how the heck do we get out of that trap of not knowing if we're actually physically interacting with something or
yeah.
it's all in the mental dimension?
Well, especially too in the case of multiple witnesses, then you have to try and figure out how their hallucinations were synced, because the stories matched up in that case,
And on
and
the
many others like it.
And on the other hand, there are cases where people are having an abduction experience. They can't wake up their spouse.
Yes.
Even Betty and Barney Hill. Betty was conscious the whole time. Barney wasn't, and
Yep.
the experience wasn't quite the same, but almost. Uh, Man, I don't know.
Yeah, there's
Maybe
so many layers.
I should give this up and take up checkers or something. But that's not going to happen.
No.
Have you ever become frustrated with this kind of because maybe the infighting or whatever, and figure you don't want to do it anymore, but then you're drawn back in?
I've never gotten to that point specifically. I mean, I'm not going to lie, it does kind of get to the point sometimes when you're dealing with so many paradoxes that it's just like, what does it all mean? Where's it all going? It seems like impossible. Um, but I've never gotten to the point where I'm ever going to give it up, I think.
So why is it that we have these uh, such impenetrable mysteries that seem to be they're so elusive and it's so hard to get a grasp on them, but we there's something in it's just built into the human condition where we can't let it go. We want to keep going.
Yeah, I don't know honestly, because sometimes too it's like when I do try to really figure out why exactly I got into all this stuff, it seems random, but also like, what else would there be? Like it's such a part of, my life. I don't know. I can't really remember a time where I ever wasn't interested in it. And trying to decipher exactly why I am is, that's a mystery in and of itself.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine just taking up some other interest or hobby and just leaving this all behind. It would
Yeah.
I've got these I've got hundreds of books here screaming at
Yep.
me to be read or to be read again.
Yeah. Oh yeah, same.
Well, we're about the end of our hour now.
Oh geez.
I know. So listen, I'm definitely, I'll definitely have you back. This has been
Nice.
so
Thank you.
much fun.
Yeah,
We don't
same
have to
here.
go quite yet. Is there
Okay.
anything else that is on your mind? Anything else you'd like to talk about? Yeah, we're completely open here. I'm just looking at my notes, and we went over quite a bit of stuff here. We covered all kinds of good stuff,
Yeah, no
um,
kidding.
and we barely scratched the surface with Keel.
Yeah.
Keel was, and I'm so happy that people like you have discovered Keel, and
Yeah. I am
because
too.
because he was being forgotten about for a
Yeah.
while. He was even being badmouthed by some people, but I won't go there.
Yeah.
Uh, and But now virtually everything he's written is in print somewhere, and
Yeah.
or on Audible. And
Yeah.
I I have to tell you that I may have told you this before, but well, Nick Redfern wrote some nice things about Keel in
Yeah.
Black Diary. He was
Ah,
talking about the Men in Black and how Keel recognized there was more than one in quotes type Men in Black,
yeah.
and Redford wrote that uh, John Keel was way ahead of his time, and in
Yeah.
fact, in whatever afterlife domain he is now, he probably still is. So I
Yeah.
thought that
Oh,
was very nice, and
yeah.
I got to hear David Paulides speak. And at the venue, and he was at his table talking directly to Stan Gordon.
Oh
And at
wow.
one point, I know we're there like flies on the
That's
wall, just listening.
awesome. Wow. Yeah.
And at one point, David Paulides just stops and he looks up and he says, John Keel was way ahead of his time. And I'm going, yes, people are,
Yeah.
young and old are rediscovering him. And thank God Brent
Yeah.
Raines has written this great book on John Keel. He never actually met John, but he corresponded with him. He talked with him for years and got all kinds of insight into the man. And
Yeah.
he's just phenomenal.
Yeah. That's next on my list is to read that the biography because
Oh
yeah,
yes,
it's yeah
and don't forget. I think you said you started
the big
uh,
black.
the big blackout. Yes,
Yep. Yeah, that is just intriguing to just kind of hear, all of the background material to what was eventually the books. It's awesome.
and his thought processes.
Yeah. Yes.
And for those
Because
that
yeah,
don't know what we're talking about, the black the big let's see, uh, the big blackout and the big breakthrough are two books that have come mostly from Doug Skinner, who was a friend of John Keel's and has this great website, johnkeel.com. Most of this material comes from John Keel's notes, so you actually can read some of the stuff that eventually became parts of the Mothman prophecies.
yeah, it's just the really cool thing to me, aside from, just the content in general, is how many times he does like check like, okay, am I, what's going on here? What is this? Am I being, too naive about this? It's amazing to see how many times he was like checking in on that, kind of
Yes.
like taking stock of himself before he proceeded with whatever was going on.
Yeah, so people, he wasn't just buying everything hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah,
And there was one
yeah,
particular witness, a lady that he kept questioning, is she, this is just coming through her, so is she telling the truth? And he says, well, she knows these things she couldn't possibly know because it's
yeah,
not in the literature, it's not written anywhere, so there must be some validity to it.
yeah. So that's just really neat to see kind of the checking and rechecking because I feel like once you do get into researching this stuff, you almost have to do that, just to make sure you're not going totally nuts. But yeah.
We'll have to talk next time. We'll have to talk more about the Men in Black because
Oh yeah.
he brings up such bizarre cases. The case with Tiny and the guy saying that he was from the Missing Heirs Bureau, and
Yeah.
the guy with the wire up his leg.
Oh yeah.
Remember that? Um,
Yes.
just
Yeah.
the just crazy
It's
stuff.
it's just like deliberate confusion, just yeah.
What it is, it's like there's an element, a natural element, a trickster element, or something, or maybe it's something in us. Maybe we're just because of the way we're wired, we're seeing things through a glass darkly, so to speak.
Yeah.
We just don't
Yeah.
have I don't know, the equipment to properly see these things. But whatever
Yeah.
they are part of reality. Uh,
Yeah.
Even if we don't, they must follow some kind of laws, even though we don't understand them.
Yeah. An underlying pattern has to be somewhere. It's just trying to sort through everything.
Well, I guess we'll wrap it up here. Encourage people to go to justanothertinfoilhat.com on YouTube. You'll really enjoy it. And if they want to contact you, Zelia Edgar, Zeliaedgar,
Yep, that's right.
and on Facebook, and
Yep.
uh, we hope to see more and more of you on YouTube and speaking engagements and so forth. And
Well,
can't wait to see some of your writings finally see the light of day. Your
thank
horror
you.
writings,
Thank
especially someone that has been inspired and influenced by H.P. Lovecraft.
Oh yeah, thank you. I need all the luck I can get with that. So, but thanks.
So again, thank you so much. Stay right there. I'm going to do our closeout here, and I'll talk to you a little bit after the show.
Awesome.
And I also want to thank my guest again. This has been a great a two-part show, and I'm looking forward to the next one. I also need to thank Irene Allen Block and Mark Johnson, and they, of course, are our fearless leaders here at the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I also want to thank Andy Mercer, who is my producer and, as the banner says, my occasional co host. He couldn't be here tonight. He was almost here, but he just got back from a trip to the U.S., which we're going to hear about next time he's on. But he was affected a little bit by jet lag, I think. And I also want to thank uh, Brian Zeller, who does the original music for the show. And Brian is an all around great guy, too. I should mention that. And I am Steve Ward, your humble host here on the High Strangeness Factor, a displaced Yank here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Thanks for listening. I will see you all again in a fortnight. Take care.